was saying, I'm Principal Solutions Engineer for DevOps, and as the title suggests, I spend a lot of time thinking and talking about DevOps, especially with customers who are also interested in DevOps. But I'm on the same team as this guy, Paul. He sees the world very differently.
And I'm also a Principal Solution Engineer with Atlassian, and my focus is ITSM. Now, I talk to a lot of customers, and obviously their interest is service management and how they grow IT as they standardize on Atlassian. And although we talk about different topics, we talk to Atlassian's largest 5% of customers. And our mission as solution engineers is to help take them and down a path so they can find the right combination of Atlassian products and services so they fit their unique needs. Now, what we want to share with you in this 6-act story that's to follow here are the kind of discussions that Ian and I have on a weekly basis. It's what I get up every day. I really enjoy this. Some people in our offices say, you got to quiet down a little bit. But we're very passionate about this. And we want to kind of get started here by just really kind of introducing the two topics and the way we see them. Ian, how do you see DevOps?
Well, when I think of DevOps, I think of Batman. It's got this utility belt full of tools, things like Chef and Puppet, Terraform. We've got these tools like Docker and Kubernetes, and now this whole alphabet soup of services to use in AWS and Azure. Batman is the world's most famous detective, and I feel like DevOps is something like detective work, of trying to understand the system and figure out what's going on. Batman is always inventing and learning new things, and I feel like that's really the spirit of DevOps. We're always kind of coming up with these new tools in the space. You've got all of these open source things to follow. Oh, and I'm a billionaire.
I love it. A bat that lives in a bat cave. Well, when I think of ITSM, I think about Superman. Now, I know some might think of those in IT as the unknown Clark Kent, doing his work and no one knows he's there. But ITSM is really the super hidden power for the business that helps drive innovation and digital transformation. It's faster than a speeding train to respond to that outage. We can recover fast. We're able to leap as a data center in a single bound to be able to get that change in time and make sure the business is safe and secure, just like the Man of Steel, delivering global stability with an amazing ITIL framework to back us up and deliver on time. But we have to be careful. Kryptonite. I have to avoid that kryptonite.
So it's time to settle this epic battle once and for all. Are you ready?
Let's get started. So I know, I get it. IT, we see this with software is super important. IT's been managing software for many, many years. But DevOps, that's super scary. Software teams sitting around, drinking coffee, building code all day, maybe in caves. All they care about is code. And from our perspective, DevOps lacks structure. DevOps might work for that unicorn or that startup out there, but for an enterprise organization, I'm concerned about that. They really believe, it's one movement to rule them all, and I think we kind of heard that in Lord of the Rings somewhere in my precious. But when I talk to DevOps people, I'm looking for that definition. There's no clear definition that I'm hearing. I hear a lot of anecdotes and that, and when it comes down to it, bottom line, it's really impractical. There's lots of theory. There's nothing out there that really just gets us to a point where how can IT and Dev work better together? I don't think DevOps is going to work in an ITIL-centric enterprise organization.
Yeah, but all of this stuff you're saying, I don't see how ITSM is better. It's just old-fashioned and out of date. There's wasteful, heavyweight processes with lots of paperwork, totally incompatible with Agile. I see it as slow, missing opportunities for automation. It's regimented with low trust that creates silos that impede collaboration. Now, you called DevOps impractical? Man, all I see in ITSM is something that focuses on management by CYA more than practical techniques that really keep things running. All these ITSM folks with their change advisory boards and CMDBs, there's no way you can ship software at the pace of modern digital business. But there's one thing we agree on, DevOps won't work in ITIL-centric organizations.
Ship software at the pace of a modern digital business. I'm hearing that song again, Burning Down the House, Talking Heads from the 80s, I know. Crazy rate of change this is. And this crazy rate of change is really disruptive for the business. We need a safe, stable rate of releasing and getting things out there. That way we can ensure stability for our business services. And to be honest, I'm tired of hearing about it worked in dev, now it's ops problem.
Yeah, but that sentiment describes the problem that DevOps solves. You really should read the State of DevOps report.
Oh, okay.
So I know if you had a nickel for every server out there, you'd be a billionaire too. Surveys are usually designed by marketing folks that have little understanding of the domain and who are far from data scientists. So many times the questions are suspect and the data is empty of insight. It's all just done to justify preconceptions. But trust me, this report is different. And I think you'll find the research compelling and the findings surprising.
Wow, that's interesting. What jumps out at me is these big numbers. I mean, if we look at right here, the large differences between the lowest and highest performing teams. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And, IT leaders would be very interested in this, especially if they could spend more time on unplanned work or, from their perspective, recover faster from failure or bring down the change failure rate. Or one that resonates with all of the IT teams I talk to out there is making these changes faster, increasing that flow of work. But, as I read this though, riddle me this, Batman. The more frequent deployment sounds super risky and dangerous.
Yeah, except that the report indicates quite the opposite. All of those faster and better practices are just the tip of the iceberg. This report links the big idea of business performance in terms of how teams are achieving their business objectives to a narrower idea called a narrower idea of IT performance that the report calls software delivery and operations performance, or SDO performance. And it links that idea to cultural characteristics in terms of how people think and their day-to-day habits. And then links that culture to a specific set of technical practices that can be objectively assessed.
Wait, performance, like unleashing the potential in every team? That sounds like Atlassian's mission. We have a history of helping teams embrace open and collaborative ways in their culture and the way that they work. More recently, with we've shipped the team playbooks and the health monitors and the plays that help them improve and work better together. We're also, having great ideas around the practices, and we've been talking a lot about that here at Summit this morning in the keynote, that help teams achieve their full potential. Okay, I see that Atlassian's community should care about DevOps because it's all about teams.
Yes, and there's still quite a struggle in the industry as a whole about this important connection between these three areas. All too often, people are dismissing culture change as some kind of soft skills challenge for just HR, but not as something critical to software and operations performance. But there are manifestations of culture in the real world. That Jira workflow with 20 statuses, that's holding you back. That 40-page release plan, yeah, that's holding you back too. And that big ball of mud monolith at the center of your company's most important business, that's holding you back too. That's why the path to changing culture is about real-world practices. But it's practices learned through a thorough understanding of the principles, not just cargo cult repetition of what some unicorn company is doing.
I'm starting to see a lot of connection with what we're talking about here. It reminds me of Mark Schwartz's book that I read recently, A Seat at the Table. And he really identifies the challenges that IT leaders are facing when they spend too much time in the demonstrating value instead of actually delivering it. It's a big struggle out there. And so many IT organizations are really good at measuring that activity, all those reports, KPIs, and we look at all of those. But what they're measuring, it actually shows that they're disappointing what they're delivering to the business. So I see some things here that are really interesting. In fact, Mark identifies how Agile and DevOps practices are influencing IT organizations in the way that they're working and moving and shifting to this Agile world. And it's helping these teams understand their challenges. We're seeing a convergence here. Now, but I'm sure DevOps teams, they spend so much time on automation, they kind of lose sight of delivering value as well, I'm sure.
Well, that's interesting, because speaking of wrong focus, I still hear people talking about DevOps as if it's only a new flavor of automation. So I really like how Chris Little put it. DevOps isn't about automation, just as astronomy isn't about telescopes. Now we know automation is important, but it's just not the focus. So DevOps needs a culture and collaboration layer, and that's what Atlassian brings.
Many IT teams and organizations that I work with, I always find their modular base, so their tiered structure, or process focus in the way that they organize. To use some common ITSM and ITIL terms, we have, our incident team over here, and we have our change team here, and there's the problem team over here, and infrastructure change and release. And so is the big idea with DevOps just to bring them all into one big team?
Yeah, not exactly. This kind of simplistic thinking tends to come from cultures that might say performance, but act in ways that demonstrate that they value power or rules even more. It's less about the team structure than it is about some key characteristics like whether the organization encourages or discourages cooperation, how management responds to receiving bad news, how people treat responsibilities and risks, how bridging happens across organizational boundaries, what happens after a failure, and most importantly, whether novelty is crushed or truly embraced. In other words, silos aren't just a function of org structure, but of broader attitudes and habits in the organization.
I like that Western model, and it's very interesting. I think it informs us a lot about culture. And despite the name DevOps, as I've read through the report there, I'm really starting to realize it isn't so much about reporting structures. It's about teamwork. Even if those teams are ad hoc, they're just kind of joining together, a team of teams, and connecting to do different types of projects and work. It's about giving those teams room to perform in their culture. So I see this. I really, that stands out to me in the report of the importance of culture. I love one of the quotes I was in the book there I was reading, in that you can bring a change of the culture by changing the way that teams work. The evidence is there. And to that point, you said, now we've talked about performance and culture, but what about the practices? What does DevOps have to say about the practices?
The most significant technical practices of DevOps fall under this idea of continuous delivery. So let's do some comparison between typical ITSM and DevOps.
Okay.
Let's start with change. When you plan for changes, is it better to have more or less?
Good question. Well, for IT, change windows are hard to come by. That's why we have a really good change calendar. We're looking forward, schedule a change, and that can get backed up for weeks, especially we have some, blackout periods where we're locked down. So we usually want to fit as much work in as possible in that window to ensure our availability numbers are high and yet still deliver on what the business expects.
Yeah, I just see in DevOps, we think more about fast recovery than availability. If you can get a change in 1 minute instead of 1 hour, customers may not even notice that there was downtime. So it's better to make small changes quickly. And if something does go wrong, small changes make sure that it's easier to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. Let's talk about architecture. What is the architecture of your data center?
Good question from Batman. It's complicated. We draw a lot of diagrams. The biggest companies have a CMDB, to represent their configuration items, their relationship, how it all fits together. And implementing a CMDB, although it can be time-consuming, it shows some value. But I have to admit, in this age of cloud and virtualization, it's hard to keep up with the pace of change.
Yeah, see, I think that the move to virtual infrastructure and beyond even into cloud-native services simply decouples applications from infrastructure. So all those complex interconnections aren't necessarily a given. It's faster and easier to make changes if we keep systems loosely coupled. Okay, how does traditional ITSM do deployment?
Well, we've got a lot of amazing checklists, and our teams are good about following those checklists to make sure that we're going to meet the mark there. We follow them to the letter, so that way we can make sure that our applications are deployed safely.
Yeah, but I think in the DevOps world, we really think about all those human steps as opportunity for error. It's even safer if all those steps are collapsed into a single command so that we can do single-click deployment. What do ITSM people do to detect potential problems before change is made?
Well, we'll probably stand up in staging, and we have great user acceptance testing. We'll go through and make sure that everyone's validating it. And then once we have a sign-off, we're ready to go, put it into production.
Yeah, I think over in the DevOps community, we think about that differently too. We think about writing tests before there's application code or infrastructure code. And then we run those tests continuously to detect potential problems. How about databases? Are database changes different than any other changes?
Yeah, of course. It takes an expert. Now, we've all heard about those devs who just accidentally dropped that database table out there, because they thought they were logged into staging. Oops. So, nobody touches production systems except for those DBAs that know what they're doing.
Okay, dropping a database is certainly real, but DBAs can do that too? So we think about pushing through changes, or through database changes, just like other changes. That is, in small steps with tests. So we still need DBAs because we need to know how to make those database changes safely. But we just don't need them only as gatekeepers. How about security? Is that a similar story?
Yeah, InfoSec usually they have a good understanding of our infrastructure. They're looking through it and scanning it and giving us a great, feedback and list of problems. And we're able to, go through and start working on and fixing those, issues, security loopholes. It is a never-ending, job.
Yeah, and DevOps has embraced security so much that it's starting to be called DevSecOps. It's about involving security up front, so those vulnerabilities are avoided from the start. And we think about this as an aspect of quality, like you can't test bugs out. You have to build quality in from the start. What about after changes are made in production? How do you know if there will be problems?
Good question. Every time there's a major incident, we'll make sure there's a problem ticket. Now, those do add up, and we have a team that's working on that. You actually just see our problem backlog. I think last time I looked, there was 500 plus in there. But it keeps the problem management team engaged. They love their work.
Yeah, in DevOps, we just don't wait. We use monitoring and observability of systems to detect even potential problems. And we solve them systematically when we detect them, not just when they add up enough to cause an outage. In the ITSM world, how do you know who did what and when?
Well, oh my, yes. We love, and have our audit trail, and we couldn't do anything unless we have, a way to control the change. So that requires that we have tickets that we create, and we have documentation.
Yeah, in the DevOps world, we use tools that already keep track of how people work. Version control systems already know who changed what and when, and we don't need an extra layer just to keep track.
Well, Superman's been sandbagging here a little bit for you, my friend. What we've been talking about does sound familiar. A lot of these practices we're seeing evolve in IT, and IT organizations have received some exciting news in 2019. With the release of the ITIL-4 publication, we have some exciting ways that we can move in this new direction. And now, did you know that ITIL has some things to say about our conversation, what we've been talking about?
ITIL is dead.
I want to give you time to read there, Batman. So you thought Superman was dead, but that is not so, my friend. ITIL-4 embraces lean and agile and DevOps in the ways that we're working and brings it to the team level in the organization. My travel copy that I provided to you today is just a good sense of what is possible here, and it fits with many of the things we've been discussing. Now, I think you'll be very surprised that ITIL focuses on, and it's a pretty big paradigm shift. It guides teams holistically in the way that they're going to work with the business, and it's very customer-centric in the value frame reference that we provide. It encourages a more flexible approach based on the needs of an organization, and it helps IT service management and individuals within the organization look at how the service economy works in the modern world, and also has an understanding and takes the value-first mindset using the ITIL guiding principles. We'll talk more about those in just a second. It also integrates lean and agile and DevOps practices into ITSM. What do you think?
Well, whoa, that was quite a read. And I'm not sure I've digested it all yet, but I certainly see a lot to agree with. But I'm still kind of wondering, is ITIL really different at its core?
Good question. ITIL-4 helps us service teams understand how to create simple and practical value streams to respond to customer demands and co-create value, reaching across multiple teams. It moves away from what we've talked about previously of processes and this more around practices. And with the complexity IT is facing today, it offers practical guidance in addressing even more of these practices.
Yeah, I know things are getting more complex for IT. With, DevOps, cloud, digital transformation even. But to me, those things mean IT needs to get faster. How does ITIL address that?
ITIL calls out the idea of a high-performance strategy by focusing on key principles that guide us toward a culture that's performance-oriented. These guiding principles are even ones that Batman and Superman would love. ITIL-4 acknowledges the importance of these principles. What we've been talking about, culture matters in the way that teams work. Look at these fantastic principles, focus on value and collaborate and promote visibility. And here's one the DevOps team will appreciate here: the optimize and automate. That's right at the close and near dear to your heart. But this is a major shift from IT, from a siloed thinking to think and work holistically.
Whoa, all that stuff really is more agile. And I really like that point about no more silos. Well, that fits really well with Atlassian's team-centric approach.
You're spot on, Batman. Team-centric is the key. And when it comes to ITIL-4 practices, it provides valuable guidance. What used to be loosely labeled as processes, we now, in the previous versions, it now gives us more of a practices guidance. ITIL-4 puts service management practices into a strategic context by looking at not just what I'm doing within IT service management, but what I'm doing in deployment, what I'm doing in operations, how I'm working with the business relationships that I've connected with, and it also brings in governance, and it does this from a holistic standpoint.
Okay, but how many practices are there?
Good question. ITIL-4 offers 34 practices and groups them into 3 major categories for better focus: general management, service management, and technical management. Now, I know your skeptical mind there, wheels are turning, and how in the world am I going to implement all of them? But here's the beauty of ITIL-4 is that it guides in its core principles to begin where you are. It's adaptable to the organization to learn. Continuous learning is around this. We'll talk more about this in a minute. And we evolve and we grow from there.
Oh, great. So some ITSM vendor can come along and sell me 34 flavors of their product? Do effective teams really need all of that?
Traditional ITSM tools have focused on creating modules around each one of these processes, and then it's up to the IT teams to find their way through modules and understanding how they'll work in that. Atlassian thinks about this differently. We take a different approach. IT teams align with the practices that are most important to them, in the way that they work and adapt to them, and they take a team-centric approach in doing their work. They align the value stream and the flow of that work to the way that they're going to deliver value faster to their organization, be more adaptable, and learn as they go. The tools and technology should be adaptable to the way that teams work. And when it comes to 32 practices, I really appreciate what ITIL-4 provides in the guidance, and we, Atlassian, would agree with this in the same way that I would just start with the 9 that we see here on the screen.
Well, 9 is better than 34, but why these?
Well, based on Atlassian's experience with working with thousands of high-velocity teams, we've found that the best-performing teams use these practices.
High velocity. Well, that certainly sounds like DevOps, and the practices fit. But what about the bigger picture? What are the takeaways from ITIL-4?
Well, you want to know it? I would say if we maybe sat down over a couple of weeks and wrote a guide on this.
Yes.
Well, let's take a look at what would be in that guide. And you know where I would start? I would start with continual improvement. It's one of the keys for an IT organization. Continual improvement is the outside layer of the service value system in ITIL-4. Continual improvement is the core skill that ITSM organizations need to develop. In a world of DevOps, a world of ITIL-4, we want to align with continual learning and improvement as a key practice. A recent global survey by the GamingWorks found that only 20% of organizations have this in their practices. And when they did find it, it was probably siloed in different parts of the organization. So as you embark into this new journey of Agile ITSM, start with continual improvement. Assess where you are and identify where you go next. Your North Star might be 6 months out ahead of you, but you can work through steps of this. And as you work through this, you'll start to see areas where you can work and improve as a team and as an organization. It reminds me of a customer story I had just recently with a major beverage manufacturer out of the Northwest. Their DevOps team had been using continual improvement for quite a while. And they found that the more and more they're relying on IT and the delivery of their services, they wanted to bring them on board. And so they started coaching just small parts of the organization, and now it is being practiced across the entire IT organization. They are now doing plan, do, act on the targets they've identified as a team. Now, if you only take one thing away from our talk today, it is continual improvement from ITIL-4.
Yeah, I really like it that ITIL puts such emphasis on continual improvement, but even better, I see that ITIL-4 recognizes Agile. And that breaks a stark contrast between the service management work that is continuous versus big bang projects that IT tends to get pulled into as waterfall projects. Atlassian is ready to deliver transformational technologies with proven agile workflows, so why not use the same project management techniques across dev and ops? I recently talked to one customer moving away from budget-driven planning, where everything is about releasing a deliverable. That customer is moving towards a value-driven planning approach, just like the one described in ITIL 4, with the value of products and services at the center. It took some adjustments for the business to ask for things from IT in this way. They were really used to something that more resembles a contract with deadlines and deliverables. And it really changed, though, when they realized that in their own day-to-day services, they were already providing a service to customers more incrementally. Now they plan in terms of buckets organized by value stream with real iterative delivery.
I love that example. And it brings me to knowledge. Knowledge is so key, and it's an IT organization's most valuable asset. In fact, it's the organization's most valuable asset, as we talked about even in the keynote today. And it's instrumental to helping teams make better and faster decisions. Now, in this digital systems age, this is all over the workplace. You know, knowledge not only exists in what we would find in email and queues, it's lost in my meeting notes, it's in the brains of the individual that just walked out for lunch. So aggregating this knowledge into a single place of shareable repository, and we see this a lot with Confluence, you know, customers that are adopting Confluence, and we see this a lot with IT organizations. They're investing in a knowledge-centric culture. That means it's encouraging the team to share their knowledge, both from a cultural standpoint, they're incentivized, but the tools make it easy. You know, I love the story of a bank in Australia that they embarked on this journey of unlocking the power of open with their knowledge-centric culture. They opened up sharing of information in Confluence across all teams. It allowed them to see what people were working on and being able to gain better understanding. I love a quote from one of the leaders of the team. He said that knowledge becomes powerful by sharing, so that it is no longer the individual's knowledge, it is the community's.
Yeah, I think there's another thing. The service desk and the quality by which requests are managed represent the real face of IT. So what kinds of signals does IT send when there's a bad user interface or slow services? Many traditional tools and practices treat all tickets the same, with a focus on making it cheaper to service those service requests. But ITIL 4's focus on value opens a new window. Some requests are more valuable than others. Conversely, the cloud is opening new ways to enable self-service. AWS recently worked with Atlassian to automate the connection between a self-service Jira Service Desk portal and an AWS Service Catalog. That way, Jira Service Desk represents the human interface to the workflow, but integrations also let automation participate too. ITIL 4 defines an incident as an unplanned interruption. And in a cloud and microservices world, we're increasingly talking about complex and always-on services. Those have users and customers that are around the world. So that means that for traditional IT teams, they're between a rock and a hard place. The services have to be stable while the change windows are shrinking, sometimes to never. That means incident response teams need new ways to deal with unplanned interruptions. ITIL 4 wisely identifies the move towards swarming. As a result of getting the best expertise collaborating at the start, teams that swarm have faster time to resolution. Inside Atlassian, we started running blameless post-incident reviews for every major outage. Now, the actions from those post-incident reviews drove our incident playbook, which has a series of plays that have helped us find and fix problems sooner. Those PIRs, post-incident reviews, have helped us to elaborate or prune our own service runbooks, so teams are more efficient when there are incidents. PIRs also drive more subtle cultural changes, like improving team emotional health and cross-functional team collaboration. They have resulted in many improvements so that the services that we operate run better, and improvements to Opsgenie that lets us manage all of those things in one place.
You know, it brings me to change. What we used to call change management is now change control in ITIL 4, and I like this evolution. ITIL 4 definition of the change practice has evolved towards a more balanced approach. Change control is focused on delivering value faster while protecting customers from adverse effects of change failure. High-performing teams that are adopting this practice, they're looking, and we commonly see this, they're automating low-risk changes. They're breaking down normal changes into smaller units of work. gone is that big ball of mud in the middle. We're moving away from cabs towards more collaborative peer reviews. They've decentralized their change approval into the business units, and they're maximizing automation to bridge to the future that we've been talking about, where infrastructure is managed as code, and they're beginning to explore how they're moving infrastructure changes into a release and deployment capability that handles the flow of IT infrastructure work. It reminds me of a customer out of Europe, a major agency in Europe that's delivering benefits support for the entire country. They went through a digital transformation where the entire organization was moving towards Agile adoption, and IT was now faced, how do we deliver in this way? And one of those was the sticking point in the bottleneck was change management, with all of the levels of change approvals. And so as they went on their journey, they moved into the Atlassian products from their traditional ITSM tools. And they looked at their standard changes, and they said, these are repeatable, we can automate these. They automated 70% of their changes. It was and just hearing this customer story, that's a significant savings. They have now shrunk their work, the box has now shrunk. I can now focus on those key elements. And so I hear a lot of those stories, and I love hearing those that fit with this new world of change control.
Now, although the definition of change control hasn't changed radically by itself, ITIL 4 acknowledges the role of configuration management tools in automating change, and even more importantly, ITIL 4 redefines the relationship of change to other areas, including recognizing a new area called deployment management. If change is the package that you want to get into production, then deployment management is the technical practice that moves that package along. ITIL 4's release management section notes that it's an option to separate deployment management from release, just as I would do with continuous delivery. Now, if you're a Confluence data center customer, then you may know that you can use a continuous delivery model to make upgrades safe. The model is called blue-green deployments. Basically, you have two environments in production called blue and green, rather arbitrarily. There's a load balancer that points to only one. Let's say blue for production. When you want to make an upgrade, you put blue into read-only mode, you clone the data into green, then you perform the upgrade on the green environment. When it's done, you toggle the load balancer over to point to green. The whole time, the users can still read all of the Confluence content. So continuous delivery isn't just about applications that you have coded yourself. It's about making it safer to deploy changes and release them.
I like that one.
Now, many people assume DevOps is about team structures, either putting dev and ops on the same team or creating a new DevOps team. But team shuffling isn't the only way to better collaboration. This is another place where culture actually matters. Even within the same team, tools can have a subtle barrier or create a subtle barrier to collaboration. So just as Agile has helped popularize the notion of T-shaped team members or generalizing specialists, we should expect our tools to follow suit. Think about 80% of our team tools should be shared so that information flows easily where it's needed and when it's needed. It's not just about figuring out how to do one function like development or even operations better and better. It's about doing all the things that customers value. So both creating new features in software and making sure that customers have a stable experience. And that's what it means to break down silos between development and operations. Man, well, that's what DevOps is all about. So why didn't we just start with this point?
Don't know. I guess epic superhero battles sounded like more fun today, but we all love them, and we'll be there for the premiere for the one that's coming up, I'm sure. But we know that the true stories here and the real life heroes are found in teams.
Okay, and I have to admit, DevOps isn't a cult, so to exclude inspiration for improvement from any source is a bad idea. I'm not going to have to worry about ITIL certified tools, but I can certainly see how ITIL 4 could help a DevOps shop.
And for that matter, ITIL 4 embraces Agile and DevOps. And ITIL 4, it looks like I'm encouraged to, learn more about DevOps, if not start, adopting that thinking into the way of my practices.
Gosh, I guess it doesn't matter what you call it, but Atlassian can help teams work better together.
Hug ops, man.
Thank you. So we really hope you found this discussion entertaining. We hope it will inspire conversations within your organizations.
And as it happens, we really did read the new ITIL Foundation Guide. We love what we saw in there and decided to go about writing it down into a guide and a paper that we want to share with you. We hope you'll take this back to your teams and use this as a guide and have meaningful discussions. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have one of the authors in the room here with ITIL-4, Akshay, up front here. He's one of the authors of the ITIL-4 publication. We've really enjoyed working with him, and if you'd like to visit with him, he'll be here with us as well as the booth. And then Teresa, I don't know if she's in here. We couldn't have done it without her. One of our other fellow authors as well. So we've been a great journey in this and learning, and so.
So for our part, we'll be stepping aside if you have additional questions for us for a little bit, but then we'll be continuing this discussion and debate at the Atlassian Solutions booth, and we welcome you to join us there.
And we have 4 minutes. We could take a couple
so
questions.
We have a few minutes, so if you guys have any questions live here, I'm happy to pass the microphone. So just raise your hand. Otherwise, you can catch up with the folks right after.
And we will be in the Enterprise Solutions booth. You'll find us there afterwards, too.
We have a break, so.
Thank you. Great talk. You had mentioned during this that CMDB was a common traditional tool to knowing a map of the infrastructure and that type of stuff. Are there different ways to kind of answer some of the questions, like either during change planning or during a major incident, to knowing, oh, this piece of the infrastructure is down? Mm-hmm. What's the true impact of that, and who do we need to get into that room?
Yeah, so you want to take that one? I know.
Well, I think
please.
You're going to hear 2 different answers, right?
Yeah.
That's because that's who we are. But I think from a DevOps perspective, there are tools like Chef and Puppet that do model configurations in your infrastructure and can be sensors about whether what the state of those are. So there are answers now that are coming out of that community. I think also the idea behind continuous delivery is to make sure that the changes that are flowing through there are isolated, that they don't have the blast radius of the whole data center anyway. But we know that a lot of organizations are coming from a place where that isn't already true, so that's why.
Yeah, and I think we're always, the traditional seem to be is, in some ways, we're starting to see this evolution where the industry's going of loosely coupled cloud structures. How do I keep up with it? And we're seeing more and more, especially with configuration management, they just carry about this upper tier of the applications and systems, and then I'm going to go to my federated systems because that data is somewhere else in real time that I would want to connect to. And so out of the marketplace, we're seeing customers connect up to be able to support their infrastructure needs. But also, if I have to bring my CMDB over, I have a customer out of St. Louis that has 2 million CIs that they're reconciling, discovering, and it's in a part of their deployment for IT on Atlassian. So good question. I'm glad you asked it. Thank you.
Yeah, this turns out to be one of our favorite
we debate
dialogues.
on it. Yeah, I'm getting him a T-shirt for Christmas. I love CMDB.
CMDB, oh.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It's great talk.
Thank you.